Hey guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage, and today we are going to work on the 32 Roadster project. So there is only going to be a couple things that were strained from how the car was built back in the day, and one of those things, pretty much the most major thing, is I opted to take out the stock 32 rear that had 411 gears in it for a Columbia rear, a factory 2-speed rear. This rear is one that has been set up for a 34 Ford. There was a rare option, or you could buy it from Columbia, I guess, where you could get a Columbia rear in a 34 Ford. The dimensions of a 34 Ford rear is just about the same as a 32 as far as the width of it goes. The big problem with the rear on these is 33 Ford, they switched, and even late 32, they switched the flange to a different style of flange. Instead of being round like a Model A, it has a star pattern, which they carried all the way through into all of the flathead V8 era of vehicles. What that does is this flange is different, so you're not able to use the torque tube, the drive shaft from the 32 rear, and you have to actually use a removable style drive shaft. So I need to cobble together a bunch of factory parts and make something that's going to work. So I have a 33, 34 drive shaft here. We have like a 35 torque tube that was just out of our pile of stuff, and some other parts that we got to put together. So what we're going to do is figure out the best way to shorten this. This is going to be a little bit different than the later cars where we have the solid drive shaft that I've shown in other videos. So we're going to try and make all this link up, and that's probably the biggest fabrication of the whole project, but it's been one that I've been kind of stressing a little bit. So once we get past this, I will be very happy. So let's get started.
Good thing these transmissions are fairly light.
Light, yeah, that's a word.
Get it squared.
Okay. Well, it's not on the lift.
Right.
Goes there. Is this the right side?
Looks like you've been laying on the ground.
Yeah, kind of a pain in the butt even when you have a lift. We had to let everything down to measure the torque tube with the weight down, and what was fighting us was the rear. When you lift the rear up, the pinion goes down, and when you let the weight down without a torque tube, the pinion goes all the way up to the floor. So
it's because it's a spring behind.
Yes, because it's spring behind. So we had to let the weight down, and I actually had a wood block and it's something mocked up here that we shoved in there just right with the angle finder to get the angle at roughly 3 degrees. and then we were able to take a measurement of what we needed for the length of the torque tube. And then we put it all back. I welded it, tacked it rather. We put it back together to make sure everything fit, and it does, but I had to lay on the ground to assemble it because, again, we were fighting that angle of everything. So when you're putting the car together, normally you'd have the torque tube bolted to the rear, and then you can use your leverage here to pull it down and make everything line up. So what we want to show, that all bolts up, everything's good. We're now going to take some measurements off of this to get the length of our drive shaft. What I usually do is take a stock drive shaft, and what kind of locates the drive shaft is there's a circlip. There's a groove cut in the drive shaft and a circlip that goes here, and that's how the bearing and your speedo gear and everything kind of all line up with that. So if you get all that set up in the front here, whatever's sticking out the back, we can measure a stock drive shaft and see where that sits, get the same measurement, cut the excess off, and put it together. A little more involved than that. But what I want to show is these are 32 rear wishbones. This was made for a 33-34. The 32, I believe these are straight.
Correct.
And on 33-34, they are at an angle. So what happens is this is now way wrong. But basically, they just put this in a press and bent that originally. So we're going to unbend it. We're also going to weld up the seam a little bit. But the other thing that's pretty nice is we were eyeballing it. And with the way we cut this, it's really close to lining up here. So after we straighten it out, I may have to just shorten this a tiny bit, but with some small modifications, we should be able to get this to bolt up to the stock location for this that was off the 35-36 setup. So that should all work out with just some slicing and dicing. So I'm going to take this apart, get our measurements, do some machining, get the drive shaft made. We'll finish weld this, and then all we have to do is the wishbones, and we'll be all back together like stock.
Supervisor just showed up too. How we doing, Moon? Doing all right?
That little sander. Alright, so we're going to heat this tubing up just a little bit. And I got my piece here that I've machined down, put a little chamfer on it, and as you can see, it kind of would start to fit, but I want it to drop on, and basically it's going to sit on this little shoulder that I machined, and that should get us just about dead on for the length that we need for our drive shaft here. So, torch lit, and just put a little heat into this so that it slides in a little easier and we don't wreck anything. And it's not going to take much because this is fairly thin wall tubing. It's right about at an inch that it has to seat down, so I'm going to go well beyond that. Okay, we're just about there. Went. All right, don't mind my messy workbench here, but we got everything all welded. Got this joint here welded. I did an interference fit where we heated it, tapped it in, and then I welded the seam together that was beveled real nice. I got the torque tube welded there, everything set up. Off camera, we actually took the drive shaft and we test fit it into the car, and then we dropped the car back down on the ground just to make sure that we had enough spline, enough of the splines were in the U-joint, and also when it was lifted up, it wasn't coming out. So everything's good. So we could put it back together just for now, so that the car, so that the rear end, the pinion, isn't shooting up into the sky when you let the car down. So that's our main motivation here. So let's get this put in and call it good. Okay. So. Wants to live.
Action.
There we go. And then we'll do a proper pin when it's all going back together.
Gotcha.
Probably the best bit is to slide this on and then get the bolt started.
In the rear? Okay.
Always gotta get through the bearing. Okay.
Oh, bearing pushed out. Let me go get a piece of pipe. You got the...
Yep. Aren't you glad we have a lift right about
Absolutely. This is way better than doing on jack stands.
Oh my God, if we were on our backs trying to
All the times having this in and out and all the way it's fighting us.
God.
That would be brutal.
That's actually the only reason I did this after the body was on. Normally I do this with the frame
Oh, okay.
just on the ground, so you can sit on top of the frame and do it.
That would be, yeah. That would be ideal there, yep.
Thrust washer.
Yep, thrust washer.
Do we have one in there?
No, you just pulled that one out of there.
That's right.
I forget which way the gear was on.
Like this.
Okay, good.
Small end goes against the thrust washer.
I am glad you remember that.
Might have to go a little. Oh no, that's perfect.
There's
See
a clip, I'll grab a screwdriver.
Worst part of working on torque tube stuff is this hole.
Right, this setup here, yeah. This is...
And dude, if you don't know the correct method, I remember my first torque tube, like rear I took apart.
Uh-huh. Oh, I imagine you could just tear shit up, right?
Yep. Oh yeah. The bearing, the clip.
Uh-huh.
I remember my first one hammering on the back of the torque tube and here, and it was still on the rear. I couldn't figure, I had all the bolts out, everything's disconnected, and it was that little circle. I mean, I was smashing.
Oh yeah, those things are incredibly strong. Once they get squeezed down in that
Yep.
in that groove, it's a piece of steel.
Let's
You tap?
if you have another screwdriver.
Yeah.
You know what? No, let me leave it alone. It's coming apart again. I was gonna squeeze the clip together a little more. But
Oh, okay. Yep.
hey, look at that.
Woohoo!
Something's working.
Right?
All right, now we can go up. All right, so now we are ready to do the radius rods. I've actually already done one of these just to kind of figure out what I was going to do. I started out with the other one by, you can see these have a bend in it. So the problem is on 32s, the tabs that are on the rear are actually straight, and they're welded on straight on the rear, and then they put a bend in the radius rod to make it meet. But on 33.4, they actually put them at an angle, so you can see this is nowhere near where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be way up here. So I started out by putting a piece of solid plate in here, putting in my press, trying to press this straight, but it was just starting to get a little ugly, and the other one was in a lot worse shape and was torn. So what I figured out is it's about 2 inches we need to take out of this section so that I can line up with where our torque tube was, the mounting point for the radius rod, and right on the rear. So if we cut this right here in front of where it starts to bend, and then measure 2 inches, it ends up taking out basically that whole bent section, and then we can put it back together and weld it on essentially straight. I will fixture it onto the rear and then also onto the torque tube, and then I'll weld it there, tack it at least, so that way we know it's going to be at the right angle and everything. So I'm going to put this in the Evolution chop saw, get it cut up, and then we'll start fitting everything together. So got the radius arms all shortened up and bolted up. Everything bolts together very tight. The way the radius rods on these early Fords with the torque tube, they're meant to be like zero slop. So if you have to shorten a set or put a set together, you're gonna have to probably either tap or knock them in with your hand just a little bit to get everything to fit. And that's how this is. Everything goes together, tightens up, and is really good. I threw a coat of Rust Encapsulator Plus on it, like the frame and everything has. It's still even just a little bit wet. So I went back over and touched up some spots, but it is good to go. Everything's shortened. We turn the wheels, it turns the transmission. We have contact with all that stuff. So that is good. So now basically we can start going over the car. I can kind of pass some of it off to Steve and he can start working on brake lines and wiring and some of that stuff. We're going to work on getting an engine running in the background, and then we're going to start making this thing an actual car. So fingers crossed all that goes smoothly, but we're moving along really, really well. Hopefully this is helpful for you guys if you decide to do this project. This is just another way you can do shortened drive shaft, especially if you're doing an earlier car with that style drive shaft. So thank you guys for following. Catch you later.